You keep waiting to feel ready. That's the part nobody talks about. You think the problem is motivation. You think one good morning, one perfect routine, one powerful realization is going to suddenly turn you into the person you keep imagining at 2 a.m. when you're lying in bed staring at the ceiling. But that moment rarely comes, and deep down, you already know that, because there have been days where you felt motivated, days where you watched the right video, heard the right quote, made the right plan. You cleaned your room, opened a fresh notebook, told yourself this time would be different. Then 3 days later, you disappeared again. Not dramatically, quietly. You stopped replying to messages, started scrolling more, told yourself you'd restart Monday. Then another Monday passed, then another. And this is where things start becoming dangerous, not because your life falls apart overnight, but because slowly you begin losing trust in yourself. That's the hidden damage people don't realize. Every time you promise yourself you'll change and don't follow through, your brain notices. You become someone you can't fully rely on anymore. And the strange part is, most people still think they need more inspiration, more motivation, more excitement, more energy. But motivation was never designed to carry your life. It's emotional weather. That's all it is. Some mornings you wake up feeling unstoppable. Other mornings your brain feels heavy before your feet even touch the floor. One small inconvenience ruins your focus. A bad text changes your mood. Suddenly the version of you that wanted discipline yesterday is gone. Wait until you realize why this matters so much. Because if your actions depend on emotion, your life becomes emotionally controlled, and emotionally controlled people stay stuck for years while convincing themselves they're trying. You can see it in small moments. Opening your phone for 5 minutes and somehow losing an hour, telling yourself you'll start after one more video, sitting in front of work while your mind searches for escape routes, not because you're lazy. That word has probably damaged you more than helped you. Lazy people don't usually feel guilty all the time. You do. You overthink because some part of you still cares. But caring without discipline becomes torture. Because now you're aware of the gap between who you are and who you could have been. And every day that gap gets slightly louder. You notice it while watching other people move forward. You notice it when someone asks what you've been working on lately. You notice it during quiet moments when there's nothing distracting you from yourself. But here's what nobody realizes. Discipline is not punishment. Most people secretly see discipline as some miserable lifestyle. Cold showers, suffering, waking up at 4 a.m. for no reason, turning life into military training. So naturally your brain resists it. Who wants to live like that? But real discipline is much quieter. It's less dramatic than motivation, which is exactly why it works. Motivation screams, discipline repeats. Motivation wants a new identity overnight. Discipline understands identity is built through evidence, and that changes everything. Because confidence, that's evidence. Self-respect, also evidence. Mental peace, usually evidence too. You don't magically think your way into a stronger life. Your brain watches your actions and creates beliefs afterward. That's why people who constantly break promises to themselves start feeling mentally exhausted, even when they're doing nothing physically difficult. Their mind is carrying too many unfinished conversations. I'll start tomorrow. I need to get my life together. I wasted another day. This isn't who I want to be. After a while, those thoughts stop sounding motivating. They start sounding like background noise. And that's when the real numbness begins. At first, procrastination feels harmless. You delay one task, then another. Then you avoid looking too closely at your own habits because honesty starts feeling uncomfortable. You become weirdly busy but emotionally stagnant. A full day disappears and somehow nothing important moves forward. And maybe the hardest part is this. You still imagine a better future. You can see it clearly sometimes. A calmer version of you, a focused version, someone who finishes things, Someone who doesn't panic every Sunday night thinking about how fast life is moving. But imagination without disciplined action becomes an emotional self-torture. Because eventually your future starts feeling emotionally farther away from you. Not impossible, just disconnected, like watching someone else's life through glass. There's a version of you that keeps negotiating with life, and there's another version that quietly decides. That's the real difference. Not intelligence, not talent, not motivation, decision. The kind that happens internally before anyone else notices externally. Because disciplined people aren't walking around feeling inspired all day. Most of them are tired too, distracted too, emotionally messy sometimes too. The difference is, they stop treating emotions like instructions. And this is the part most people miss. Your feelings are real, but they are not always accurate. You can feel incapable and still be capable. You can feel behind and still be progressing. You can feel unmotivated and still move. That realization changes everything. Because once you stop waiting for emotional permission, your entire life starts moving differently. You wake up and do the thing before your brain begins negotiating. You stop building dramatic recovery plans after bad days. You stop turning every mistake into an identity crisis. You become calmer. Not because life became easier, because your relationship with yourself became more stable. And honestly, stability is underrated. People chase intensity because intensity feels productive. Huge life changes, extreme routines, massive transformations, but most real progress feels strangely ordinary while it's happening. A workout, a page written, a difficult conversation handled instead of avoided, closing the app, starting anyway, stopping the excuse halfway through. Tiny moments. That's where identities are built, not in cinematic breakthroughs, and maybe that's disappointing at first, because part of you still wants the dramatic turning point, the moment where your old self disappears forever and a completely new person takes over. But life rarely changes that way. Usually it changes quietly. You repeat something long enough that eventually your mind stops arguing with it. That's how discipline becomes identity. Not forced, not fake, not motivational, familiar. At some point, showing up stops feeling like a battle because your brain no longer sees it as optional. And that's freedom. Not doing whatever you feel like. That version of freedom usually turns into chaos eventually. Real freedom is being able to trust yourself. Imagine how different life feels when your brain stops constantly doubting you. When you say you'll wake up earlier, and you do. When you say you'll work for an hour, and you do. When you promise yourself change, and your actions finally agree. That kind of self-trust changes your posture, your thinking, your energy, even the way you walk into rooms. Because confidence was never loud, it was consistency remembered. But the strange part is, discipline also exposes things. It exposes how often distraction was emotional escape, how often procrastination was fear wearing comfortable clothes, how often I'll do it later actually meant I'm scared to fail. That truth can sting a little, especially when you realize how many years were spent waiting for motivation to rescue you. But don't miss the important part. You noticed it now. And awareness changes people. Because once you see the pattern clearly, it becomes harder to keep lying to yourself comfortably. You start catching the excuses in real time. You notice the emotional avoidance sooner. You feel the moment your brain tries escaping discomfort. And for the first time, maybe you don't automatically obey it. Maybe you sit down and work anyway. Maybe you go for the walk anyway. Maybe you keep the promise anyway. Not because you suddenly transformed into some perfect disciplined machine, but because you finally understand something most people never do. Your life is shaped more by repeated actions than intense emotions. That's why discipline beats motivation every time. Motivation creates possibilities, discipline creates evidence, and evidence changes identity. So maybe the goal was never becoming a different person overnight. Maybe the goal was becoming someone who stops abandoning themselves in small moments. Someone calmer, more honest, more stable. Someone whose future is no longer controlled by temporary feelings. Because eventually, the life you want stops feeling impossible. It starts feeling earned. And maybe that's the most important shift of all. Not becoming superhuman, becoming reliable to yourself again. If this felt a little too real, maybe that's the part you shouldn't ignore.